The Song of Hannah. My heart exults in the Lord, my strength is exalted in my God. The Song of Mary. The Lord has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy according to the promise he made to our ancestors. There's a lot of pointing going on right now at each other, at possible ways ahead. That's typical with elections. It's typical in times of social unrest. Add a pandemic and incredible storms and fires and ecological and economic devastation. It's like a friend of mine said a few weeks ago when we were having a conversation. He said, it's like we're living a scene from Genesis. But there is an incredibly clear message in these stories, and it's a message amplified by the fact that they're coming from people who in Bible times were labeled powerless. Women. Bible times in general were not great times for women. To say they were second class might be being kind. It was often worse. They had little or no control over their lives. They could be divorced and turned away by a husband in an instant. A husband could take on other wives or female slaves or be unfaithful in an assortment of ways and never fear retribution. In general, women could not work independently outside the home in any reputable way, and they couldn't own property, and often the only way to gain a sense of power for them was by providing the family with children, particularly sons. And yet, out of what seems to be a position of powerlessness, time and again we see women in the scriptures, from Ruth and Naomi to Tamar to Deborah, and yes, to Hannah and Mary, become vehicles of grace for God's people. And very much like many of the women who find power in the Bible, Hannah and Mary, who obviously share a link in this story of God saving God's people, do something remarkable. They give up what they're being given to God. They sing for joy that God has given them each a son, and then understand that this gift, these boys, like their mothers, are going to be different. The lives of their sons will be given to God's purpose. And what we read of that purpose, especially with Mary's song, should make those of us who are pretty well off, like yours truly, a little nervous. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. There's an undeniable sense that God's purpose means lifting up the lowly, leveling the field, feeding the hungry, and yes, even at the expense of the rich. And part of me, at least, wants to take some issue with Mary about this statement. But I ain't messing with her son. No thanks. But think about what these women did with their lives and the lives of their sons. They gave them to the purpose of God. And I gotta be honest. I think a lot of the actions we see in life all the time, not just in times of crisis, come out of fear. We want life to be good. We want life to be peaceful, lovely. If life was a compass, we'd want it pointing consistently in one solid direction. And we get scared when that's not happening, when life isn't proceeding cleanly down the tracks, when it feels like maybe we're going to lose control. Contrast that with Hannah taking the son she wanted so badly and giving him to God, to the prophet Eli, to raise as his own, right after he was weaned. Contrast that with Mary giving her unmarried self to God, to God's will, and knowing, at least in some way, that a quiet, safe life was not what God had planned for her boy. Look at the power of these two women doing what I would wager very few of us could do, giving themselves and the beings they loved the most over to the complete purposes of God, and then see what it gives them? Joy. Incredible joy. What is up with that? I'll tell you, or at least I'll try. Life can be quite pleasant when it's on the tracks, the compass pointing consistently north. Quite pleasant when it's on our terms, when it feels like we do have control. But finding joy, that means you're going to have to give yourself up to something bigger than yourself. To paraphrase Dr. King, life isn't worth living if you don't have something you're willing to die for. And that call to something bigger, for us, it's in these songs of Hannah and Mary. Our call to joy is to lose ourselves in the purpose of God. To grow in that purpose, to really live in a way where that purpose becomes our own. A lot of the problems that we have right now, and they're real problems, they're being made worse and even unsolvable by the fact that we insist on solving them only our way and not with an eye to the purpose of God. And there are as many our ways, my ways, out there as there are people. But here's the thing. In asking us to take this road to joy, God is calling us to be voices proclaiming something really specific, that all people should be cherished as God cherishes all people. What did God say to Abraham right at the start of all this? Your life, your nation, shall be a blessing to all nations, to all people. It's something that you're hearing proclaimed in this song of Mary as she realizes that that promise to Abraham is now something alive in her. And it's alive in us. It's a promise alive in us. The thing is, if we live and approach our life and our problems remembering the purposes of God, it means we have to listen to each other. And we all know there's precious little of that going on right now. We have to listen and work together and compromise on just about everything except one thing. That all people are God's family. That all people are to be lifted up. That all people are the people God sent God's Son to save. Our solutions have to be good news for everyone. How we solve the problems, how we get it all done, that's where you argue and compromise. But if we would approach our problems with a very simple litmus test, a test that says, hey, am I listening? Am I being selfish? Or am I looking to fulfill God's purpose, God's will for this world? I think if we used that test, we'd all be on a pretty good road to living out God's will. You know, we've lost a lot of people, it seems, in the last couple of years. One was a football player, the great Gale Sayers of the Chicago Bears. He was also famously the author of a book called I Am Third, which was immortalized in the famous movie Brian's Song, a movie no girl in my high school ever missed when it was on TV because it made them cry. But it is an emotional and beautiful story. Piccolo and Sayers were the first roommates in the history of the Chicago Bears that were not the same color. But their beautiful friendship is remembered for a lot more than just that. It's remembered for the battle that Brian Piccolo fought with cancer at an incredibly young age, of his courage, and of his eventual passing, all with his friend, Gail Sayers, by his side. The title of the book sums up the faith and the philosophy of this great man. I am third means God is first, others are second, I am third. If you want to understand what it means to live life with the eye on fulfilling God's purposes, I think that's it in brass tacks. That's pretty much a simple rule for being Christ for other people. A rule for us to follow, to be Christ for each other. And it's the path to redemption for all of us. And the path that will give you joy. The joy to do like Hannah and Mary. The joy to really sing.